The alarm sounds. The sun had just begun to rise over the vast, barren landscape of Zero-5, a distant outpost on the edge of the galaxy. The planet, once thought to be a peaceful place, was now on high alert. Soldiers on the ground had just started their daily routines when suddenly, a loud, shrill alarm rang through every building on the base. It was the unmistakable sound of an emergency red alert. In the command center, Lieutenant Erica Tan felt her heart race. She quickly stood up from her desk and rushed to the large central screen. Her fingers moved fast, trying to find any information, but the screen remained blank for a few long seconds. Then the words flashed across the screen in large, bold letters. Human warship incoming. Prepare for impact. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She wasn't expecting anything like this. The humans, Earth's military, hadn't been active in this sector for years. The peace treaties were supposed to have kept things calm. But now, they were approaching with their warship, and no one had any idea why. Lieutenant Tan's mind raced. The last time humanity had been involved in anything on Zero-5 was over a decade ago, during a skirmish on the edge of the galaxy. Their warships were powerful, intimidating, and equipped with technology that the enemy had never fully understood. The mere thought of a human warship approaching filled her with dread. She quickly keyed in the emergency code to alert all units. "This is not a drill," she barked into the comm system, her voice steady but urgent. "All hands, to your battle stations. We have an incoming human warship." Across the base, soldiers rushed to their stations. Some had never even seen a real fight. They were young, fresh recruits who had joined the Empire's military just months ago. The older soldiers, who had been part of the last Great War, were more experienced, but even they could feel the weight of the moment. The atmosphere was thick with fear and uncertainty. As the seconds ticked by, more information started to come in. The base's sensors detected the warship's trajectory. It was moving fast, faster than any ship they had encountered before. Its shields were already activated, and it was entering the planet's atmosphere with terrifying speed. The first officer, Commander Vance, stepped into the command center, his face grim. He was a tall man, his expression always calm in the face of danger. But now, even he couldn't hide the concern in his eyes. He moved quickly to the main screen, looking at the readouts. "What do we know?" he asked, his voice low but firm. "Very little," Lieutenant Tan replied, her eyes glued to the screen. "We can't get a full read on their ship's specs. The technology is too advanced. It's as if they're cloaking their ship's true power." Vance frowned. "Damn humans. They always have something up their sleeves." Erica glanced at the commander, her expression worried. "Should we contact the fleet?" "No," Vance said firmly, shaking his head. "We don't know enough yet. We don't want to give away our position unless we absolutely have to." For a moment, the room was silent. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. Every person in the room could feel it. Their lives, their futures, the fate of the entire base, depended on what would happen next. Outside the command center, soldiers were preparing for combat. Weapons were checked, ammunition loaded. There was a sense of unease in the air as they wondered what exactly they were about to face. No one had ever fought the humans on this scale before. They had heard stories, of course, whispers of how the humans had fought their way through impossible odds during the last war, but no one had ever fought them one-on-one. The commanders on the base tried to stay calm, but it was clear that the stakes were high. They had little intel on the ship's capabilities, but they knew one thing for sure: the humans did not come unprepared. As the warship approached the planet, the soldiers on the ground could feel the ground rumbling beneath their feet. The power of the human warship, even from a distance, was overwhelming. It was a reminder that humans had never backed down from a fight. If they were coming here, it meant they had a reason, and no one could predict what that reason was. Inside the command center, Lieutenant Tan's fingers moved swiftly across the control panel, trying to get more data. Suddenly, the screen flickered, and another message appeared. All enemy units on alert. Defenses are being raised. Erica's stomach twisted. If the humans had made it this far, they were ready for a fight. And if they were ready, so would the Empire need to be. The countdown began. Humanity's surprise. As the red alert blared throughout the base, the soldiers and commanders of Zero-5 had no choice but to continue their preparations. The fear that had gripped them earlier now turned to anxiety and confusion. What was this human warship capable of? Why had it appeared now, after so many years of peace? And most importantly, what would they do when it reached them? Lieutenant Tan's fingers hovered over the control panel as more data flowed in, but the screens remained frustratingly blank. The enemy's warship was unlike anything they had encountered before. Its speed and size alone were intimidating enough, but the human fleet had a reputation for using advanced technology. Commander Vance stood at the front, his hands clasped behind his back. "We don't have the full picture, but we need to assume the worst. This warship isn't just any ship. It's from a species that has a long history of surviving against all odds." Erica nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The stories from the previous wars spoke of humans as relentless fighters. They adapted quickly, never giving up, and always outsmarting their enemies with strategies no one could predict. That reputation made them both feared and respected throughout the galaxy. Across the base, soldiers exchanged nervous glances as they prepared for battle. Many of them had never faced a real threat. They had been trained for war, but none of them had truly fought one of Earth's warships before. Tan stepped up beside the commander, her face grim. "We need a plan. We can't just sit here and wait for them to make the first move." Vance turned toward her, his eyes hard. "Agreed. But we don't know what we're up against yet. We need to stay focused and be ready for anything." The human ship was getting closer, its presence growing more ominous with every passing second. The base's sensors now began picking up more signals from the enemy fleet. There were other ships, smaller ones, moving in formation with the warship. "It's not just one ship," Lieutenant Tan said, her voice tense. "There are other smaller vessels with it. They must be preparing for some kind of attack." The room fell silent as the realization hit everyone. This wasn't just a diplomatic message. This was a full-scale assault. The humans weren't here to negotiate. They were here to fight. Suddenly, the main screen flashed a warning. It was a communication from the human ship. "Put it on screen," Vance ordered. A crackling voice came through the speaker. "This is Captain Maria Steele of the human warship Vanguard. We are entering your airspace. This is your only warning. All defenses are to stand down. You have 30 minutes to surrender or face annihilation." The message echoed through the room, leaving the commanders in stunned silence. The calm, cold tone of the human captain sent a chill down their spines. There was no emotion, no offer of peace. It was a simple, direct declaration. Lieutenant Tan clenched her fists. "They're not even offering us a choice. They expect us to just roll over." Commander Vance remained eerily calm. "Humanity doesn't operate like we do. They don't waste time with negotiations or threats. They act swiftly and decisively. That's what makes them so dangerous." Erica's mind raced as she tried to process the implications. There was no question now. They were facing a force unlike any they had ever encountered. A warship with its own fleet, led by a captain who spoke with the authority of someone who knew they would win. "Commander," Erica said, "what's our response?" Vance glanced over at her, his face hardening. "We fight. We show them that they've made a mistake coming here." But as he spoke, another message blinked onto the screen, this one from a nearby outpost. "Enemy warship is using advanced cloaking technology. Visual contact is now lost. We cannot track their movements." The tension in the room shot up instantly. The human ship had disappeared from their sensors. It could be anywhere. Were they already over the planet? Had they moved to another location? "Damn it," Vance muttered, his frustration evident. "They've already put us on the defensive." Outside the command center, The sound of soldiers scrambling to their stations could be heard. Everyone was preparing for an attack, but now they had no idea when or where it would come from. The human warship could strike from above or below, and they had no way of knowing what weapons it carried. Lieutenant Tan felt a cold sweat form on her brow. The human ship had vanished without a trace, and now they had no idea what kind of firepower it could unleash. Their only hope was to hold their ground and pray they could survive long enough to mount a counterattack. "I've read the reports," Erica said quietly, trying to calm her racing thoughts. "Humans are ruthless in combat, but they've never faced a force like ours. We can hold them off. We just need to be prepared for anything." Vance nodded, but there was no mistaking the concern in his eyes. "We're going to need more than luck. We're going to need everything we've got." And as the seconds ticked down, the base's fate hung in the balance. The humans were out there somewhere, and they were ready for war. The first encounter. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The entire base was on edge, and the air crackled with anticipation. Soldiers and officers alike could only wait, knowing that at any moment, the humans might strike. The warship had disappeared from their sensors, leaving them blind and vulnerable. Inside the command center, Lieutenant Tan and Commander Vance stood side by side, staring at the now empty screens. The silence was deafening. "Where the hell are they?" Tan muttered, her eyes scanning the empty radar map. "We don't know," Vance replied, his jaw clenched. "But we need to be ready. They're out there, and they won't waste time." Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by a massive rumble beneath their feet. The walls of the base trembled as if something large and heavy was descending from the sky. The soldiers' eyes widened, and panic spread like wildfire through the ranks. Was this the attack? Before anyone could react, the main screen flickered to life. The image was distorted at first, but then it cleared. A massive shape appeared, so large it filled the screen. For a moment, no one spoke. All eyes were locked on the image of the human warship, now hovering just above the planet's atmosphere. Its sleek, dark silhouette was unlike anything they had ever seen, and the hum of its engines was enough to send chills down anyone's spine. It was here. The humans had arrived. The warship was enormous. Its metallic surface gleamed in the sunlight, reflecting the harsh light of the planet's twin suns. The ship's design was sleek, almost alien in its precision. It looked like a creature of war, built for speed, built for destruction. There was no question. This was a warship unlike anything they had ever faced. "Commander, they're here," Lieutenant Tan said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do now?" Vance's face was cold, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. "We fight. We hold our ground." But as he spoke, another warning flashed across the screen. Enemy ships, small, fast vessels, were now emerging from the warship's lower hangar base. There were dozens of them, swarming like bees around a hive. They were equipped with advanced weapons systems and had already begun to form up into attack positions. "Damn it," Vance muttered. "It's a full-scale assault." On the ground, the soldiers had already begun to prepare for the worst. Weapons were checked again, shields were raised, and armored suits were donned. The atmosphere was thick with tension. This wasn't just a skirmish. This was a battle that would determine the fate of their entire base. Lieutenant Tan moved to the main comms panel, her fingers shaking slightly as she keyed in a command. "All units, prepare for immediate engagement. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." Outside, the sky seemed to darken as the human fleet took position. The warship loomed overhead, its massive size blocking out the sun. From below, the smaller ships were fast, too fast. They darted across the sky like shadows, slipping in and out of sight, almost as if they were invisible. Then, without warning, the first volley of fire came. The sky erupted with bright flashes of light as the human ships unleashed their weapons. Explosions rocked the surface of 05 as missiles rained down from the skies. The base's defenses, which had been ready for a conventional assault, were no match for the speed and power of the human ships. Erica's heart pounded in her chest. The explosions were deafening, and the ground shook violently. She could feel the base's outer defenses failing as the enemy closed in. "Prepare for impact," she shouted, but even as the words left her mouth, the warship above released another round of devastating fire. This time, the blast hit one of the base's main turrets. The explosion sent debris flying, and smoke filled the air. Soldiers scrambled to find cover as the attack continued. Commander Vance moved swiftly, barking orders. "Get the fighters in the air. We can't let them break through our defenses. We'll show them we can fight." But Erica's mind was racing. The humans weren't just attacking. They were playing with them. The way they moved, the way they struck with precision, and then faded back into the darkness. It was like they knew exactly how to break their defenses without ever getting too close. "I don't like this," Tan said, her voice tight. "They're not fighting like we do. They're calculating." Vance nodded. "That's the problem with humanity. They don't think like us. They don't fight like us. They fight to win. And they always adapt." As the warship continued to hover above, launching wave after wave of smaller ships, Erica could feel the pressure mounting. Every second felt like an eternity. The humans were relentless, and their technology seemed to be far more advanced than anything they had on the base. It was clear they had underestimated the strength of humanity. "We need to act fast," Vance said. "We can't let them get any closer." But even as he spoke, the human warship began to move. Slowly at first, but then with increasing speed. It was heading directly toward the main control center. The giant ship's engines roared, and the vibrations in the ground grew stronger. The battle had only just begun, and it was already clear humanity wasn't just a threat. They were a force to be reckoned with. Human strategy unfolds. The sky above 05 was alight with flashes of fire and the roar of battle. Small human ships darted and weaved through the air, each one moving with a speed and precision that the soldiers on the ground had never seen before. Their weapons, while powerful, were unable to land a direct hit as the enemy ships danced through the atmosphere, barely giving their opponents a moment to react. Lieutenant Tan's heart raced as she watched the chaos unfold before her. The human fleet had not just arrived to fight. They had come prepared. Their movements were calculated, methodical, as though they had already studied every possible scenario. Every strike, every evasive maneuver seemed intentional, as if they were guiding their opponents into a trap. "We need to do something," Tan said, her voice filled with frustration. "They're everywhere, and we're losing ground." Commander Vance remained calm, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "They've got us on the defensive, but they're not overwhelming us with brute force. They're using something else, strategy. They're manipulating our defenses, forcing us to waste fire on empty targets." Erica looked at the smaller ships again. They weren't attacking in the usual manner. Rather than coming straight at the base in full force, they were attacking in small, seemingly random bursts. But when one ship would appear to be vulnerable, another would swoop in to intercept. The human fleet moved like a hive, a swarm of precision strikes, never staying in one place long enough to be hit. "I don't understand," Lieutenant Tan muttered. "They're not going for the kill shots. They're just disrupting us." "That's exactly it," Vance said, narrowing his eyes. "They're disrupting our systems. Look at how they're breaking up our defense lines, one piece at a time. They're not focused on brute destruction. They're focused on breaking our will." On the battlefield, the enemy was relentless. Every time their ships pulled away, a new volley of missiles or laser fire would strike again, hammering the base's defenses. The soldiers on the ground had to scramble constantly to adjust to the shifting tactics. They couldn't predict the enemy's moves, and the pressure was starting to show. Even the most experienced commanders were beginning to question their next steps. "Commander," Lieutenant Tan said, her voice sharp with realization, "they're trying to confuse us. It's not about destroying us. It's about breaking us down, piece by piece. They want us to waste resources and fire on phantom targets. They want us to chase shadows. Vance gave a grim nod, his eyes focused on the chaotic battlefield outside. They're not giving us a chance to regroup. Every time we adjust, they pull back, only to strike from a different angle. It's almost as if they're testing us. Tan clenched her fists, frustration boiling over. And we're failing the test. We're not failing, Vance replied, though his voice lacked the conviction it once had. We're just not used to this kind of warfare. We've always relied on superior numbers, firepower, and brute force. But the humans, they're different. He took a deep breath, looking at the soldiers around him, their faces filled with equal parts fear and determination. All right, it's time to adjust our strategy. We're not going to beat them with numbers alone. We need to think like them. We need to be unpredictable. Lieutenant Tan looked at her commander, confusion in her eyes. What do you mean? We're going to stop playing defense, Vance said. If we keep reacting to their moves, we'll lose. We need to take the fight to them. We'll play their game, but we'll make the rules. Erica's eyes widened as she realized what Vance was suggesting. We'll bait them. That's right, Vance confirmed. We'll make them think we're weaker than we are. We'll send a few small, vulnerable units into areas where they expect to find an easy target. And when they go for it, we'll hit them with everything we've got. It was a risky move. But at this point, there was no choice. They couldn't keep being pushed around by the human fleet. They had to take a stand, even if it meant luring the enemy into a trap. Get the message to all units, Vance ordered. Prepare for a counteroffensive. We're going to make them think they're winning. Tan hesitated for just a moment. Do you really think it'll work? Vance's face was cold with determination. We have no other choice. As the soldiers scrambled to execute the new orders, Lieutenant Tan watched the human warships in the sky once more. They were still circling, still moving with the same precision. They had no idea what was coming. Outside, the battle continued to rage, with the human ships launching another round of missiles toward the base. But this time, something was different. The soldiers were no longer retreating, no longer simply reacting to the attacks. They had a plan. With the trap set, the countdown began. The base's defenses shifted. Small units were dispatched as bait, deliberately exposed to the human fleet, designed to lure them into the open. If all went according to plan, it would be the humans' turn to make a mistake. And then they would strike. Counterattack and desperation. The base's defenses were now in a state of constant flux, shifting between offense and defense. The soldiers had been trained for conventional warfare, but this was something else. The enemy ships had the speed, the intelligence, and the ruthlessness to outmaneuver every strategy they'd tried so far. Now, Commander Vance's plan was the last hope. Lieutenant Tan watched through the command center's observation windows as the first bait units were deployed. They were small, lightly armed ships designed to attract the attention of the human fleet. They sped through the air, darting just within range of the enemy sensors, clearly exposed and vulnerable. It was a dangerous gamble, but they had no other choice. "Do you think they'll take the bait?" Tan asked, her voice filled with nervous anticipation. Vance didn't take his eyes off the battlefield. "If they do, we'll be ready." Minutes passed, and then it happened. A burst of fire from one of the smaller human ships lit up the sky, and the trap was set. The first of the enemy vessels darted toward the bait unit, its engines roaring as it broke away from its formation. Then another followed, and another, like sharks circling their prey. "That's it," Vance muttered. "Now we strike." Lieutenant Tan quickly gave the signal. The waiting troops, hidden in concealed positions around the base, moved into action. Within moments, a dozen larger, heavily armed ships emerged from their positions, locking onto the unsuspecting human ships. The humans had made the first mistake. They had broken formation, and now they were scattered. A barrage of missile fire rained down on the small enemy ships. One by one, they were hit, exploding in brilliant flashes of light. The human fleet, caught off guard by the sudden counterattack, scrambled to adjust. For the first time since the battle had begun, the humans were forced to respond as the Empire's ships came in fast and hard, launching their own salvo of missiles. "Good hit," one of the officers shouted. The base had scored its first real victory in the battle. But just as quickly, the human ships adapted. A group of them regrouped in a tight formation, and in the blink of an eye, they launched an even more devastating counterstrike. The Empire's ships barely had time to react before the human fleet's weapons hit hard. Explosions erupted on the surface of the base as several of the Empire's ships were hit directly. The soldiers inside scrambled to keep their systems online, but the damage was already done. Erica watched in horror as one of the larger ships of the Empire disintegrated before her eyes. The human fleet wasn't just fighting. They were making calculated, devastating moves, hitting their opponents in the exact places where they were weakest. "They've adapted already," Tan said, her voice low with dread. "How are they doing this?" Vance clenched his fists. "I told you, they're smarter than we thought. They don't just fight with weapons. They fight with their brains. Every move is calculated." The Empire's counteroffensive had faltered. The humans had broken through the first layer of their defenses, and now the tables had turned. They had not only taken out key targets, they had forced the Empire's forces to waste precious resources, leaving them vulnerable to the human fleet's devastating tactics. And just when the Empire's forces thought it couldn't get worse, the human warship, the Vanguard, began to move again. Its massive engines lit up, and with an incredible burst of speed, the warship descended into the atmosphere. It hovered just above the battlefield, its enormous size casting a shadow over everything below. The warship's weapons powered up, and for a moment, all was still. Then, without warning, it unleashed a barrage of energy blasts that ripped through the remaining Empire ships. The base's outer defenses buckled under the pressure, and the world seemed to shake with each successive hit. "Fall back," Vance shouted, his voice commanding. "Get the survivors to the evacuation zones. Now." But even as the orders were given, it was clear that the tide had turned. The humans had complete control of the skies. Their superior tactics and technology had overwhelmed the Empire's forces, leaving the base in ruins. Lieutenant Tan felt her stomach churn. Their counterattack had been a last-ditch effort, a gamble that had failed. And now, the enemy had them on the ropes. Desperation filled the air as soldiers began to flee for safety. There was no more time for strategies, no more time for fighting back. The only option left was to survive. As the last few ships retreated into the atmosphere, the massive human warship continued to hover, its weapons still charged, ready to strike again if necessary. The battle was not over, but the victory was clear. The Empire had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. For Lieutenant Tan, there was one bitter thought that lingered in her mind as she watched the remnants of the base burning in the distance. The humans weren't just fighters. They were survivors. And now, humanity had shown the Empire exactly what that meant. The turning point. The battle had shifted entirely in the humans' favor. The once proud Empire's forces, shaken and broken by the relentless strategy of the human warship and its fleet, struggled to keep their remaining units intact. Lieutenant Tan stood in the command center, watching as the last remnants of their defenses crumbled under the weight of the human assault. The base had sustained catastrophic damage. Fires burned in every direction, the sky above filled with the smoke and debris of destroyed ships. The ground trembled beneath the shockwaves of each new explosion. It felt as if the world itself was coming apart. The human warship, Vanguard, loomed overhead like a silent predator, its presence more terrifying than any weapon. Erica clenched her fists, trying to suppress the panic that was rising within her. "What now, Commander?" she asked, her voice strained. Vance stood beside her, his face grim. The battle had taken a heavy toll on both of them. But his mind was still sharp, still calculating, despite the chaos surrounding them. We've got one shot left. We can't fight them head-on. We'll need to outthink them. Tan looked up, confusion etched on her face. Outthink them. We've already done that. They're not just soldiers, they're strategists. We're not going to win with another surprise attack. No, Vance replied, his voice hardening with resolve. We're going to play their game. But we need to understand it first. We need to force them to make a mistake. Lieutenant Tan raised an eyebrow. A mistake. They've already been making us make mistakes. We're running out of time. We don't need time, Vance said, his eyes narrowing. We need the humans to believe they've won. Once they think they have us cornered, they'll make their move. That's when we strike. Tan felt her heart beat faster. Are you saying we should pretend to surrender? Vance nodded. Exactly. We'll send a message that we're beaten. We'll feign weakness, make them think they have us. But in doing so, we'll pull them into a trap. It was a risky move. But with the human warships still hovering above them, the prospect of waiting until they were completely wiped out was a worse fate. If they were going to survive, they needed to make a bold move. I'll set the plan in motion, Tan said, turning quickly to send the message to the fleet. It's our only shot. Outside, the human warship continued its descent, its engines glowing with an ominous power. The smaller human ships still circled above, their lasers slicing through the air as they targeted the remaining Empire forces. Vance's plan had begun. Across the battlefield, small units of soldiers and ships began to retreat. It wasn't a hasty retreat. They were moving slowly, deliberately. It was a show of weakness. The humans would see it. They would sense victory, and they would think their job was done. But they were wrong. The Empire's final weapon hadn't been used yet. The warship above seemed to pause for a moment, as if waiting for a signal. The human fleet had already scattered their forces, leaving only small pockets of resistance to deal with. From the control room, Vance could see the Vanguard's weapons power down slightly, the ship waiting, as though anticipating the end of the battle. But then, just as the humans began to ease their guard, the Empire's hidden reserves activated. In a swift motion, two of the remaining capital ships broke from their camouflage positions on the far side of the planet and emerged from the shadows of the atmosphere. They were armed and prepared. Their shields were up, and their weapons systems hummed with readiness. Now, Vance shouted, his voice full of urgency. The Empire's ships launched everything they had, from heavy missile barrages to energy pulses designed to overwhelm even the humans' advanced shields. It wasn't perfect. They were still outmatched. But the humans had made a fatal mistake. They had become overconfident. They thought they had won. The two Empire ships sped toward the Vanguard, launching everything they had in one final desperate push. The enemy warship, which had been hovering with relaxed readiness, suddenly found itself under fire from two powerful ships that had seemingly appeared from nowhere. At first, the human fleet was stunned. The Vanguard's shields absorbed most of the energy blasts, but a few penetrated. The ships shuddered under the force of the attack, and the smaller ships scrambled to defend. The human fleet, still reeling from the sudden change, was forced to regroup, scattering across the sky to avoid further hits. Erica's heart raced as she watched the plan unfold. The Vanguard had been knocked off balance. The humans weren't invincible after all. It was working. They were finally fighting back. But just as victory seemed within reach, the human fleet adjusted once again, shifting from their defensive positions to more aggressive tactics. One of the smaller ships broke off from the main battle, coming directly toward the two Empire ships. It fired a single, powerful shot directly at the engines of one of the capital ships. The explosion was catastrophic. The ship's core ruptured, and in an instant it was gone. Pieces of debris floated in the atmosphere as the other Empire ship struggled to keep its footing. "We can't keep this up," Tan whispered, as the Empire's forces watched their last hope disintegrate. But Commander Vance didn't give up. No, we fight to the last. Victory and reflection. The battle had stretched far beyond the Empire's expectations. What had begun as a confident advance into Zera 5 had turned into a brutal, drawn-out struggle for survival. Despite their best efforts, the Empire's forces were now crumbling. The Vanguard, humanity's warship, had proven to be everything they had feared, and more. Lieutenant Tan stood amidst the chaos in the command center, her hands trembling as she watched the final remnants of their fleet being overwhelmed. There was no escaping it now. The human warship hovered overhead, a constant reminder of their failure. The last remaining Empire ships had been reduced to smoldering wreckage. The Vanguard's weapons had torn through their defenses with unrelenting precision. Now, only a few scattered units remained, their survivors huddled together in hiding, trying to avoid the inevitable. Erica's mind raced. She had seen the Empire's ships fall one by one, each explosion marking the end of another failed defense. But something in the back of her mind told her this wasn't just about the loss of ships. It was about the survival of their way of life. They were being humbled by a force they had underestimated for far too long. Commander Vance stood next to her, his expression as hard as ever. His face was streaked with dust and sweat, but his eyes were still sharp, still searching for a way out. But even he knew that their options were nearly exhausted. "We've done everything we could," Vance said, his voice low. "But it's over. The humans are too strong, too smart." Tan's heart sank. The Empire's power had once been unrivaled, its military unstoppable. But now, it was nothing but a shattered remnant, left to lick its wounds after the battle. The humans had shown them that power wasn't just about strength. It was about adaptability, cunning, and resilience. The Vanguard's cannons powered up again, and for a brief moment, Tan thought they were going to fire once more. But then, something unexpected happened. The warship's weapons dimmed, and a message appeared on the command center screen. "Attention, Empire forces," came the cold voice of Captain Maria Steele, the human commander. "You are defeated. Surrender your remaining forces. You will be treated with respect, as prisoners of war. This is your final warning." Tan couldn't believe her ears. The humans were offering them a chance to surrender, to live. They had the power to completely obliterate them, but instead, they were showing mercy. Vance looked at the screen, his expression unreadable. "They don't want to destroy us completely," he murmured. "They want us to understand something." Tan shook her head. "Understand what?" "The strength of humanity," Vance replied, his voice filled with reluctant respect. "We underestimated them. We thought we could crush them with brute force. But they beat us with intelligence. They beat us with strategy. And now, they want us to learn from it." For a moment, the command center fell silent. All around them, the soldiers waited for orders, uncertain of what would happen next. The prospect of surrendering was unthinkable, but there was no denying the reality. They had no choice. Tan turned to face Vance. "What now?" Vance looked out at the battlefield, his expression weary. "We do what they say. We surrender. But we do it with our heads held high. We fought hard, but we lost. And maybe, just maybe, we'll live to fight another day." The remaining units of the Empire's fleet slowly powered down their weapons, signaling their surrender. The once proud war machine of the Empire was no more. As the Vanguard moved closer to the surface, the human fleet surrounded the last of the Empire's ships. The survivors were taken aboard the human ships, their fate now in the hands of their conquerors. The battle for Zera 5 had ended, and humanity stood victorious. As the Empire's forces were taken into custody, Lieutenant Tan couldn't help but feel a strange sense of admiration for the humans. They had fought with a kind of purpose that the Empire could never understand. They weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting to survive, to preserve everything they had built, and in the end, that had made all the difference. "Maybe we'll get another chance," Vance said quietly, his gaze fixed on the human fleet. Tan nodded, though she wasn't sure what the future would hold. One thing was certain, though. The Empire had learned a hard lesson today. Humanity was not to be underestimated. And as the Empire's survivors were taken aboard the human ships, their heads held high in quiet defeat, they realized the truth of what the humans had shown them. Humanity doesn't just fight wars, they survive them. And that makes all the difference.